Okay, so in process costing systems, we mentioned in the first video that there's a whole lot of stuff to keep track of, right? We basically start with our materials, and then we could have any number of departments um, in a process. We might have, kind of what we call sequential processing, where we go department one, department two, department three, department four. We might have what we call a parallel processing system where departments work independently and then they kind of merge the product all together. Point being, regardless of what exactly the process is, it's a whole lot more complicated than job order costing, because with a job order costing system, we are intentionally isolating each individual project because we want to get the cost specific to that project. With process costing, remember, these products are homogeneous. They're more than likely going to be made in much, much higher volume. And while that initially might sound like it should be easier, it's not. So we have this thing called a cost of production report. Now, this cost of production report, I may make a video on this to kind of help you out. I don't really, I don't really make you complete a cost of production report in my classes, just simply because it's been my experience that students either don't have, they can't reproduce it, particularly in a face-to-face class, or if they can, they're basically just memorizing it. But if we understand how a production report works, that goes a long, long way to understanding process costing. So let's read what it says here. It says a cost of production report summarizes the production and cost data for a department and is prepared using the following four steps. All right. So it says step one, we're going to determine the units to be assigned costs. Now this is going to make a little bit more sense here in a moment, because remember, when we are making anything, and this doesn't matter what type of cost system we're using, we don't say, okay, well, this job has to be done, uh, all of it today, or all of it within this week, or all of it within this month. We routinely are going to have projects that stretch across days or weeks or months. So we're going to have beginning work in process, and we're going to have ending work in process. We're going to have units that were started in the period, and we're going to have units that were started and completed, and those are rarely going to be the same number. So number one is a big thing. Step two, it says compute equivalent units of production. Okay, so um, in process costing, in job order costing, we could just say, okay, this is the value of our inputs for this job at the end of the period. We're actually going to use a conversion process to say, okay, well, we have these items, and as for this type of cost, we're 100% done, perhaps. But maybe for another type of cost that we're incurring, say conversion cost, something like that, we may only be 50% of the way completed. So we have to use this process of equivalent units of production. And if we're going to do that, we're also going to have to determine the cost per equivalent unit. All right. And then step four, we looked at those couple of diagrams in the previous slide, where essentially what we were doing after we moved some direct materials into the first department's work in process, we were then transferring out work in process from one department to work in process for the next department. And that was an example of what we would call a sequential process costing system. And most of our examples are going to be sequential because it's easier uh, to wrap our heads around. Okay, so we have four steps here. We're not actually going to formally put one of these together necessarily, but if we understand each one of these four steps in the sequence, that will really help our understanding of the topic. So there are different types of cost flow assumptions. You know this from your Accounting 1 class. And with process costing, there are essentially two. There's what we call FIFO, and there's also the average cost method. Now, your slide says because the first in, first out method is often the same as the physical flow of units, we're going to use the FIFO method. And that's fine. We are going to talk about the FIFO method. The FIFO method is more accurate and it's better for decision making. And that's really the reason why we're going to use it. I will warn you that it is a little bit more difficult. So make sure if you are accessing information to supplement your understanding via the web or a textbook resource, whatever the case may be, that you're looking at examples of FIFO, of the FIFO cost flow assumption with regard to process costing, because it's the average cost method is out there and it's simpler, but that's not, it's that won't really teach you what you need to know. So step one, it says the first step is to determine the units to be assigned costs. And this is just some, supplementary information here. A unit can be anything. We can be dealing with, how many tons do we have? And so if we have, say, for example, I don't know, if we had 6,400 pounds, we would say, okay, we have, what would that be? That would be 3 1/5 tons or 3.2 tons. So we have more than 3 tons, but not nowhere near 4 tons. We would say 3.2. We can do the same thing for gallons, pounds, barrels, cases, whatever the case is. Most of our language that we're going to use is just going to be the word unit. We're going to be determining equivalent units. So we're on step one, and it says determine the units to be assigned costs. All right, so you really need to pay attention here. It says the mixing department is accountable for 65,000 gallons of direct materials during July, computed as follows. Now, before we go any further, I want to direct your attention right here. Direct materials. What we're going to be looking at over the next couple of slides is the mixing department and their work in process as it pertains to direct materials. We're going to get into some conversion costs later, but right now we're just looking at direct materials. Okay, so with that said, we want to acknowledge under the FIFO method that at the beginning of the month, we already had 5,000 gallons of these, I believe it was ice cream that we were making. So we have 5,000 gallons worth of materials already. Now, during the month of July 1 through July 31st, we're going to receive an additional amount of materials, all of those, what was it, butter and sugar and some kind of dairy, like milk or something like that, from materials that are flowing into work in process for the mixing department. And when we add these two figures, our beginning materials and our addition in materials, we have total units or gallons in this particular case to account for 65,000 gallons of materials. All right. So simple enough so far. So now we're going to break this down into a number of groups. It says for July, the following 3 groups of units are assigned cost. The first group are those gallons that are in the beginning work in process at the beginning of the month. In other words, this was work that was started in the previous month of June. All right. Then we also have group 2, which is, pay attention, units that were started and completed during July. Okay. Units that were started and completed in July. And then group 3, it says units in ending work in process inventory on July 1st. So I want to talk about this group 3 just for a moment. Essentially what we're saying here is that we started so many gallons of production in the month of July. Some of those units that we started were not only started, but they were completed. The remaining units that were started but not completed are going to be members of group 3, and that is ending work in process as of July 31st. And if we wanted to take it a step further, we could say that these units are going to be beginning work in process for the month of August. Okay, so make sure you can wrap your head around this. So we've got a little bit of a diagram here. I think this might help a little bit. We've got these groups broken down into group 1, 2, and 3, just as we said. And we said here that we had 65,000 gallons to be assigned cost. Well, if we add these three figures up here, that is absolutely true. We do have 5,000 plus 57,000 is 62 plus 3,000 is 65,000. And you know what, with that said, I'm going to find my calculator just in case we might need that. So if you want to do the math on that, you can, but trust me, it is 65,000 beginning inventory. And then remember, we requisitioned 60,000 gallons of materials in the month. So we had 60,000 gallons of materials that were started into production. Of those 60,000, 57,000 gallons were both started and completed in July. That's that group 2. And this will always be our biggest group by far. However, of these 60,000 gallons that were started in July, there are 3,000 gallons that are incomplete at the at the end of the period. That's our group 3. Okay. So looks like, let's see what we have here. We basically talked about this already, but again, group 1, we had already an existing inventory, 5,000 gallons. Started and completed in July was 57,000. That gives us 62,000. We also had 3,000 gallons of materials that were started in the ice cream process in the month of July, but are not yet complete. Again, we add these three figures together. I'm just going to do this in regular numbers. 5 plus 57 plus 3 equals 65, in this case, 1,000 gallons. Yep. So that's step 1. And I think let's do this. Let's go ahead and close this video out, and we'll start another one. This one's starting to get a little bit too long. So we'll stop it here, and then we'll pick up with step 2.